goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. Your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof. Her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to her kitchen chair. She broke your throne. She cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the Hallelujah. Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. You say I took the name in vain. I don't even know the name, but if I did, well, really, what's it to you? There's a blazing right in every word. It doesn't matter what you heard. The holy or the broken, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, I did my best, I prayed with truth, I didn't come through. And if I did, here went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord with nothing on my tongue but Hallelujah, Hallelujah,
Please stand for the reading of the gospel. The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 10th chapter. Jesus said to the 12, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward." This is the gospel of our Lord. You may be seated. Where did Danny go? You might appreciate Danny. Got it right, didn't I? Am I calling you by another name? I do that, you know. I've got to tell you, I was saying to Jenny right before worship how many times we've had an anthem right before the reading of the gospel. And I found myself sitting up here and just wanting to sit and reflect for about 10 minutes quietly about the music that I've heard. And just really appreciate your music and the gift of your voice. I should also say, we were sort of joking around about moving forward. And then my worthy liturgist, can you come and sit with us? By the way, everybody knows, come here, everybody knows Caitlin is our very best worship assistant, right? Does everybody know that? When are you actually moving off to college?
I'm moving August 25th.
Was that your grandmother speaking?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll all be here to shed a tear. Thank you, Caitlin. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord Jesus Christ. Let's make today Story Day. Does that sound all right to you? Let's make it Story Day. You all have faithfully come out on this 4th of July weekend. You could be at home shooting off firecrackers or fishing or something. And so let's relax a little bit. If I can get myself arranged. And tell a few stories. Let me start, though, by saying we do not do nationalism in the church. Does that come as a shock to anybody? Without a lecture on why Christians have often suffered greatly over nationalistic desires, I will just say that we are patriots. Is that not true? We are patriots when it comes to understanding our proper role of supporting our country's best instincts, right? But we resist when especially the poor and outcast, the homeless and refugee, we could make a long list about that. We could add to that people who are worrying about things like health care in our society. We resist when especially the poor and the outcast and all the rest, when their needs are not taken seriously. So I just wanted to add that on this 4th of July weekend. It would be easy to do a whole sermon about what it means to be a citizen within a country and in this world as a Christian person, but I decided instead to focus on the gospel, which also, when you think about it, really touches on the very same subject. So our focus this morning is once again on Jesus and his preparation of his disciples before they go on the road. As I have repeatedly said, during the summer season of Pentecost, we are focused on Jesus on the dusty roads of Nazareth, all during the summer season as we listen to the Gospels. And I suppose if you're like me, if you're preparing to go on the road, you get kind of revved up. You want to get on the road. Let's get going. And yet, the Gospels of the past couple of weeks have all been Jesus preparing his disciples to go out into the world. And therefore, you and I, we know that our ears, too, are to be tuned to the instructions that Jesus himself gives to them and to us. His words, I hear this morning, as clearly words of reassurance to the disciples. You may notice what he's basically saying is, wherever you go, there will be somebody to welcome you. If you speak in the name of righteousness, there will be somebody who will hear the word of righteousness and accept it and welcome you. If you speak the word of a prophet, often something that is hard to speak and harder yet to listen to, there will be someone there who will receive the word of the prophet and will receive and welcome you, a reassurance to them. Somebody asked this past week, does this gospel go along with that passage that talks about shaking the dust off their feet? Remember that? Jesus saying to them, if you go somewhere and the people reject you and they won't listen, what do? Shake the dust off your feet, go on to the next town. Yes, indeed. These words are comforting. What might draw your attention, as it is drawn mine especially, is toward the end. And whoever gives even a cup, Scott, whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. So part of the question for me is, what do you think of when you think of a cup of cold water? And remember, this is really basically about the disciples, and yet we can't help but hear an implication, can we? Even if he's referring to the disciples as these little ones, maybe referring especially to some new disciples who aren't at all sure about what they're supposed to be doing, these little ones also makes us think of those in our world who really need our help, doesn't it? And that cup of cold water, it might make you think, first of all, that the baptism in that cup of cold water gets us involved in some things that are new in our life, and makes us ask what our mission is in the world, but also who needs that cup of cold water. So 3 stories. Scott, can you skip ahead to that first picture right there. Don't go any further, whatever you do, because I thought, boy, this congregation's so smart. I'll bet there's somebody sitting here who's immediately going to be able to tell me who this is, sitting with these folks in an indigenous country. Too bad isn't Rebecca Ford an anthropologist? Too bad Rebecca's not here. Person I'm referring to is over on the right. I know it's hard to see from where you are, but she has glasses on.
Is it Margaret Mead?
I'm sorry, you can't guess.
Oh.
Kurt said, is it Margaret Mead? Switch to the next one. Margaret Mead, you get the present, Kurt. December 16th, 1901 to 1978. Remember her? It occurred to me, it's interesting. Does anybody know one of the books that she wrote about Samoa? We worshiped with the Samoan congregation last week. Coming of age in Samoa. Margaret Mead. Well, she told a story. She was once asked, what was the earliest sign of civilization that she had run across in her studies as a cultural anthropologist? Expecting an answer like a cooking pot or something similar as a kind of universal sign of civilization, Mead responded, a healed femur. What's the femur? Big bone in your leg? I was telling somebody before worship, funny thing happened last night. My Jewish neighbor, who fell a month and a half ago and has been in rehab ever since for, guess what? A broken femur. Frances happens to be Jewish, just happened to come by our door with her walker in her recovery last night, and she and her son and daughter and caretaker came in and sat for a while, and I kiddingly said to Bill, who was president of the synagogue, my sermon's sitting right there for tomorrow if you want to read it. Well, I had to run out and do something, and I came back and he said, I read your sermon. Did you notice how the story about Margaret Mead applies to my mother, Frances? Broken femur, now healed. Do you get the point? Margaret Mead was referring to the leg bone. Her point was that this ancient relic that she herself had seen, this healed femur, was an example of something that could not have happened. Whoever it was, could not have survived a broken bone unless there had been somebody there to take care of that person, right? To provide food for them. Otherwise, if you had a broken femur, you'd probably just die, right? This morning's gospel is about providing food and care, I think, in part. Whether it's for those disciples going out into the world, but providing a cup of cold water. A story is told, story number 2, about a monastery that fell on bad times. And it was kind of interesting that our friends sitting in our condo last night, Bill was reading the story from a Jewish perspective. Only 4 aging monks had survived in this particular monastery, as the story goes, in years of decline. They tended to the gardens, engaged in prayer together, and one day they noticed a rabbi who would appear every month or so. He stayed in a shack on the edge of their grounds. They referred to him as the Rabbi of the Woods. One day, after many years, the abbey of the monastery stepped out to find the rabbi and found the rabbi standing at the door. And so he opened his arms wide open, as if he'd been waiting for the abbey all this time to come. He welcomed the abbey into his shed. And here the abbey realized the rabbi had been praying for them in recent years. You could tell by the rabbi's comments. The rabbi said, "You have come to me for a revelation. Here it is. But you can only say it once, and then it is not to be repeated ever." Here's the revelation. The Messiah is in your midst. The abbey returned to the monastery, and there he told the brothers that he had a single revelation from the rabbi, but that it could not be repeated. One of us is the Messiah, the abbey said. They were shocked. Certainly not one of them, imperfect and squabbling and lacking in faith as they had become over the years. But from that day forward, the story goes, they began to treat each other differently, each suspecting one of the others of being the Messiah. And the community began to grow and flourish because it had once again become a place of love and Christ's peace. So the point is obvious, isn't it? That where we see Christ in our brothers and sisters, as we are disciples within this congregation, trying to take part in Christian mission, sometimes well and sometimes imperfectly, right, over the years. As we are doing that, we will want to give a cup of cold water. And as part of this community of faith, we will probably want to offer that cup of cold water and encouragement and support, not only to each other, but to those others out there who need it so desperately. Well, just let me ask you, does that make some sense to you? Being a part of Bethany Church? Do we see in each other some of Christ and what Christ is trying to carry out in the world? And I suppose the more important, deeper question is, does that make some difference in terms of the way we interact with each other in the life of the congregation. And then, of course, as we go out into the world, and we may see in that homeless person, for example, we may see the face of Christ there too, along with the need for a cup of cold water. Last story. You up for one more? It's not as long as that one. A man enters the church on Sunday morning. He looks kind of disheveled. Okay? Strikes everybody as somebody who doesn't really belong here, who didn't dress up for the occasion. Looks like maybe he hasn't taken a shower for a while, right? And he comes walking up the aisle, and you know what he does, this stranger? He sits down in front of the church on the floor, waits for the service to start. So there's a head usher at the back of the church. Does everybody know what a head usher looks like? They're there to intimidate, not to welcome. At least sometimes. And the head usher says, "I've got this." You know what he does? He walks up to the front of the church. He's got a hymnal and a bulletin in his hand. Sits down on the floor with the man. Prepares for worship with him. What do you think? You think that might actually happen somewhere?
I think it'd be nice if it did.
Pardon?
I think it'd be nice if it did happen.
Okay. How do you think the man sitting on the floor all by himself felt? Welcome. Maybe somebody needs to come up and sit with Justin and Joshua since they're new this morning. Is this first time here? Yeah. First time? Good.
They're brave to sit on the front row.
That's as far forward as you're going to go. Right? Okay. So, giving a cup of cold water. What does it mean? How do we do it? How do we do that toward each other as we go through this call process? How do we do that out there in the world? Amen.